Hello, this is Troxel. In today's video, we're going to go ahead and figure out how to do a full render of the project that is on the timeline. We've got a lot of code to get to today, so let's get to it. We need to start with where we left off on the previous tutorial. We need a little bit more information before we can do a full render, so let's take our current screen here and let's add the other information that we're going to need to get. First of all, let's drop another label up here. Save the text to Save Directory. Then let's put another label up here and we will change that text to file name. Then for the Save Directory, we're just going to put a text box over here to display the directory that will be chosen. So let's put a text box on here. And then for the file name, let's also put a text box on here. For the Save Directory, let's change the name of this text box to txt_dir_box. And for the file name one, let's change this file name to txt_filename. Now we also need to be able to get the saved directory. So let's add a button that will let us choose the directory. So we'll come up here, pull a button over here. I will call this one btn browse, and then we're going to change the text to browse. Then we'll add another button to the screen, and we'll let the text of this be render. Then we'll change the name of it to btn render. So now we have all the pieces on the screen. Now we need to start populating those pieces. So let me double click browse right quick, which will get us our button browse on here. Let me go back and we'll double click render, which will get us our render click object here as well. So now we're going to put a couple routines in that you'll be able to use over and over again. So what I'm going to do is copy a couple of routines in here so that I don't have to type everything as we go along. First routine I'm going to type in is called Get Save Directory. In this case, we're going to pass it to the original directory that is listed in that box. If it's null, then we're going to change it to a blank string. Then we're going to have to open the folder browser dialog. Our text is going to be select the desired folder. And then if you see right here, our directory is underlined in red. That means that we have a problem here. If we go up to the top, our problem is that we don't have using system.io. Now that we've got system.io in there, we can scroll back down and you'll see that our directory is now working correctly. So we come on through here, we set the initial directory to what we had in the text box. If it exists, then we set the selected path to that initial directory. Otherwise, we just set the selected path to drive C. Then we show the dialog, and it will return the path back to us. If they hit cancel, it will return the original save directory back to us. So now let's add the code in here to call that routine. This one is going to be fairly simple. We're going to do our text directory box, and we're going to set the text equal to the get save dir, and we're going to pull the original text from txt dirbox dot text, and then of course we have to end with a semicolon. And that's all we need in that line. So we're going to get the original text that was in that box, which to begin with right now is nothing. It's going to call getSaveDir, which is going to ask for the directory that we want to save everything to. And then when we click on OK, it's going to return that information back to the text directory box. The second routine we're going to paste in here today is the DoRender routine. This DoRender routine, we're going to pass it certain information. First of all, we're going to give it the file name that we want to render it to. We're going to send it the renderer we want to use, the render template we want to use, the starting time code, the length of the render, whether or not to include markers, and whether or not to set the set stretch flag. This little check right here will double check to make sure that the file does not already exist. If the file does already exist, then we're going to pop up a message that that file is already there and return, unless we have an override existing files flag set. And right now, override existing files is just set to true, and it's just set right here. So if you don't want to override existing files, that can be set to false, or that could be moved up as one of the parameters if you'd like to set that differently for different times when you call this. If the file does exist, then we attempt to delete that file name. Then after we have attempted to delete it, if it still exists, then it may be opened by Vegas. It may be in the media pool. So we will delete it from the media pool and try to delete it again. If it still exists, then we say we could not get rid of that file, so therefore we cannot overwrite that file. Now comes the guts of this routine. First of all, we're going to set our render args to a new render args variable. Inside the render arguments, we set the output file to our file name. We tell it which template we're going to be using. We tell it where to start on the timeline, how long the render should be, and we pass the other two flags to it. Once that is done, then we can simply call the render routine and pass it the arguments, and that will pass it all of this information. After the render has been completed, if we get the flag back that it is completed, then it will return. Just no changes, it will just simply return. If the user presses the cancel button, so if the status comes back as canceled, it will display a user canceled button and return. If for some other reason it failed, then it's going to build up this message and tell you that the render failed, and it will tell you what it was, the file name it was rendering to, the file name type, the render template name that it was using, and the other information, and then it will display that information. So now let's add the code necessary to call this DoRender routine. Like I said, we need all of this information right here. So if you remember on this screen, we chose the renderer in this box. So now we need to get the renderer information from this box. To do that, we can just look at the index that they chose. Let's start with our renderer, and we'll just call that my renderer equals, from our array that we created, full renderer. And which element are we going to look at? We're going to look at our combo box render type, and we're going to look at selected index, the one that they have selected. Now we're going to do the same thing on the template. So render template, my template is going to equal full template, and then once again we're going to get it from CMB render type dot selected index. So we're looking at the number that was selected in the combo box. We're looking at that same number in the two arrays that we created in the last video. Now let's create the file name. So we're going to create the full file name, and we're going to start that by getting the directory that was chosen. So we look at textbox.txt plus the file name that they entered, which will be text file name.txt, and then we need to add the extension for the renderer. To get the extension, we could look at my renderer dot file extension, and we want the substring starting at position 1 and going to position 4, and that will give us .mpg, .mp4, .wav, whatever format we're rendering to. Now let's set up a time code, and we're going to call this our render start, and that's going to be the beginning of the timeline line, so I'm just going to say new time code, and we'll just put 00:00:00:00, and then we'll set up another time code. So the render length is going to be my Vegas, and now we're going to look at the project, and then we're going to see how long is this project, myvegas.project.length. And now we're ready to do the render. So we call DoRender, and then we're going to pass it the full file name, my renderer, my template, the start time for the render, the length of the render, and for right now I'm just going to pass false and false for the include markers in the set stretch. And then we end that with the semicolon. And that should actually do it. So let's do a quick build here. And our build succeeded. So now let's start Vegas. So we need to put something on the timeline. No, I do not want to match. Let's just take a small chunk of this, and we'll just have about 15 seconds worth here on the timeline, so it'll render quickly. Then we go to Tools, Scripting, Run Script, and we're going to go ahead and pick our JETDV render script bin release, the DLL file, and then we can go through and choose whichever renderer we want. So let's just pop down here, and I'm going to choose the Magix AVC MP4 Internet 1080p 2997. Then when we click on Browse, you notice it'll default to Drive C, and so we can choose any folder we want. Let's just go to this Watch Render Test folder. Notice it says C:"Watch Render Test, and if we click Browse again, we'll scroll down and notice that it defaults to that directory the next time. And then let's put in our file name, test render. Then we'll click on the render button, and the render is started. We can see the progress of our render going on here. And with that beep, our render is complete. We can now close this, and let's look at that folder. So let's create a new file explorer. We'll go to Drive C, and we'll go to that Watch Render Test, and here is our file. And if we open it up, this is the render we made. So as you can see, that's how we can render the entire timeline. Please let me know what you'd like to see in the comments so that we can expand this rendering program further and suit the needs that you're looking for. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.